Good morning, and thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you to Sandra and Danny for opening our service today in a good way, and I'm sorry to the elder who did the smudge, who's the fire keeper. I've forgotten your name already, but Wallace Gayaska for also smudging with us this morning. Fred. It has been my practice since the fall of 2023, after sharing a stage at a conference in the United States with a woman named Amy Kenny, who wrote a book called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request, to describe how I show up when I preach or when I give a lecture in public spaces. And that's for anybody who might be blind or sight impaired. So I'm about 5'9". I used to be 5'10", but too much sitting at a computer has compressed my spine, I think. I have just below my shoulders, dark brown, increasingly graying hair, pulled back in a clip. I am wearing abalone and silver Tree of Life earrings that were made by Mia Hunt, who is a Hiltzik artist from Bella Bella, and a white blouse, and I have these wonderful, cool palazzo pants that are white and taupe and burgundy with a form line design on it from West Coast culture. I'm also wearing my inclusive pride stole that was painted by a trans woman fabric artist in the States, and in recognition of the fact that it is also Pride today in Toronto. And so, both things are true. We are recognizing Pay Rent Sunday, and it is also Pride Sunday. I also preach from full text, and so also for accessibility, I will send a copy of my sermon to Sarah in the office. So for anybody who is hard of hearing and wishes that I had spoken more slowly or would just like to read my words again, I will make those available to the congregation for anybody who would like that. Friends, let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. And may we never lightly presume to hear your word, and may I never lightly presume to preach your word, for in your word is abundant life. Amen. I want to begin by being honest about where I'm standing. I'm a Haistjok woman, and I'm a very long way from my own territory. I am a guest here on this land that has just been named for us, that was here holding its own memory long before this building, long before this denomination, long before me. I tell you that not as a formality, but because it is, as it turns out, exactly what this sermon is about. What it means to show up somewhere that you do not own. What it means to be here and to not be in charge. And so I want to start with a word. One word in Hebrew, hineni, here I am. 3 times in the story we just heard, a voice calls Abraham's name, and 3 times Abraham answers with that one word, hineni. He says it to God in the first verse before he has any idea what the asking is going to cost him. He says it to his own child partway up the mountain when Isaac looks up and asks the one question that no parent would ever want to answer. Where's the lamb? And he says it a 3rd time at the very last second to a voice from heaven that tells him to stop. One word, 3 times. Here I am. Here I am. Here I am. The church has always admired Abraham for the first one, the readiness to say yes to God no matter what it costs. We have built whole theologies of faithfulness on that first, here I am. But this morning, I want us to get to a place where we start noticing the 3rd time Abraham says, hineni. Let's go back and begin with the first, though. After these events, God tested Abraham. Abraham, he said. Oh, Abraham, God said, and Abraham said, here I am. There is something genuinely beautiful in that, the total availability of it. God calls Abraham and does not negotiate, and Abraham does not negotiate. He doesn't stall. He doesn't ask for some concrete proof that he's being called by God. He simply makes himself present. Here I am. Whatever this is, I'm in. And then God asks Abraham to sacrifice the boy. Now, I should be honest with you that there is a way out of this story, and faithful people take it so many times. There are readers, careful ones, kind ones, who say that God never really asked this at all, that the voice telling Abraham to take his son was not God's voice, but the old voice Abraham carried out of Ur, the blood religion of the gods he was raised among, the ones who were always hungry for a child. On that reading, the whole point of the story is God refusing to be that kind of God. And the prophets seem to back it up, because Jeremiah says centuries later that such a thing never so much as entered God's mind. And a morning like this one, with the hearts still planted freshly in the garden and the names of stolen children on our hearts, I think that that's a merciful reading. It's tempting. It lets God off a terrible hook. But I'm not going to take it today, and I want to tell you why I'm leaving the hook in. Because that merciful reading can quietly become a hiding place, a way for the church to decide that God never asks anything that actually costs us, so that we never have to reckon with the things that we were once so sure that God wanted. The danger in our history was never that God asked too much of us. It has always been when we've been too certain that we heard it right. So this morning, I'm going to let God be the one who asks, and to sit in how unbearable that is. And Janet, thank you for your tears, because it is unbearable. And I want to stay in that place for one stubborn reason. You can only be stopped from something you truly believed you were meant to do. If God never asked, then the voice that halts Abraham is just clearing up a misunderstanding. But if God really asked, and then God stays the hand, then that being stopped is itself an act of faith, the hardest one. And that is the whole road that we are walking this morning. So let us walk it with fear and trembling, and not pretend that it is a gentler road than it is. I want to sit in the discomfort of that, because the church has spent a great deal of energy trying to make this story comfortable over millennia, and it is not comfortable. A faithful man hears what he believes to be the voice of God, and what that voice asks for is a child. And he says, yes. He rises early, he chops the wood himself, he saddles the donkey and walks for 3 days towards the place where he intends to do this terrible thing. And at no point in those 3 days does it occur to him that here I am to God might require him to question what he has heard. I know something about that, and so does this church we love. I've spent my scholarly life looking at what happens when people are absolutely certain that they are saying, here I am to God, and the thing that they do is carry a knife up a mountain. One of the reasons I wore my pride stole today is because I, along with the General Secretary last summer, offered an apology to the Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA plus community from the church to the queer church for being exactly that type of faithful person who carried a knife up a mountain and wounded so many people because of their sexual orientation, gender, and gender identity. because that is the history of Christian mission on this land and lands like it. They were not villains, mostly. They were people of real and burning faith who heard the call and answered, "Here I am," and were so sure that their yes to God was right, that they couldn't hear anything else. They could not hear the people whose territory it already was, could not hear the languages they were silencing, could not hear the children. They built the altar. They built the schools. They were certain the whole way up that this was what faithfulness looked like. The same goes for certain homophobic readings of Scripture. So no, I will not stand here and only admire Abraham's first "here I am." I have seen what the first "here I am" does when it's the only one a person knows how to say. Then there's the second hineni. Halfway up the mountain, the boy speaks, "Father." And Abraham answers him with the very same word he gave to God, "Hineni," "Here I am, my child." And Isaac asks his question, "Here are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" And Abraham, who knows exactly where this is going, says, "God will provide." Here we have a father fully present to his child, "Here I am, my child," while walking that same child toward harm, available and complicit in the same breath. The two "here I ams" in the same story, the one to God and the one to the child, are in fatal contradiction with each other, and Abraham cannot see it. This morning, some of you knelt in a garden and planted hearts. You did that for children, because every child matters. For children who were taken in the name of a God somebody was very sure they were obeying, and for the children who did not come home. And I don't want to use those children to make a point. They are not just an illustration in my sermon. They are the grief in the center of this room, and they are owed more than a rhetorical turn in a sermon. But I will say this, because the text puts this issue in front of us, and we're not allowed to look away. This is a story about a child on an altar. And we are reading it on a morning when this community has already named out loud in your own prayer of confession that children were taken and parents were left behind. The land under this city remembers those children. It does. Land remembers what is done on it. And that's not poetry to Indigenous people. It's the plain fact underneath this whole day that the hardest thing the church has to confess is that it said, "Here I am" to God and "Here I am" to the children in the very same era, and could not feel the contradiction because it never learned to say, "Here I am" in the third direction. So let's look now at what Abraham's hand is doing in verse 10. Abraham stretched out his hand and seized the knife. The hand is extended. It is holding the blade. He has said yes so completely, so faithfully, that he is one motion away from a horror. And he is certain, right up to that instance, that this is obedience. And then the voice, "Abraham, Abraham." And he answers, "Hineni," "Here I am," the third time. And the voice says, "Do not stretch out your hand." Abraham stretches out his hand to take the knife. In verse 12, God says, "Do not stretch out your hand." The same hand, the same words. The voice from heaven does not try to correct Abraham's theology. It doesn't try to argue him out of his certainty. It doesn't give him a better doctrine of God. It simply tells him to stop, to take the same hand that he was so sure he should extend, and to just put it down. And here's the whole point of my story today, the thing I want you to carry from here. The entire mercy of this text turns on whether Abraham is available to the voice that stops him as he's about to do what the voice sent him to do. Whether his third, "Here I am," is as ready as his first. The church has been very, very good at the first kind of obedience. We have said, "Here I am" to God, and then carried fire and a knife up a great many mountains, fully convinced. But we have been slow, agonizingly slow to learn this third "Here I am," the willingness to be stopped, to hear a voice say, "Put down your hand," and to not treat it as an attack on our faith, but to recognize that this voice too is holy, that the ones telling you to drop the knife might be the ones saving you from what you are about to become. And I need to be clear about whose voice that is on this land in our time, because it's too easy to keep this comfortably up in heaven somewhere, to act as if this was some miracle that could only have happened thousands of years ago, that a God who shows up and acts in the world, who speaks to us directly, isn't accessible to us. The voice that says to non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, "Put down your hand, you are not in charge here," that voice has a body. It is the voice of Indigenous peoples, of nations who were never conquered and never ceded this place, saying, "Not like that. Not on terms decided for us. Not one more thing done to us in the name of your God or your government or your corporations." And the test, the actual test, the one the story says God was running all along, is not whether non-Indigenous people in Canada can summer another burst of certainty. It's whether they can finally be stopped. Whether the church and society at large can say, "Here I am," in the key of accountability, instead of the colonialist status quo. Today is Pay Rent Sunday. So what is the rent on a day like this? Look at how Abraham's hand actually comes down. He looked up, and there was a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. There was provision. He didn't have to finish what he started. The hand came down empty, and the boy walked back down the mountain alive. And then Abraham did something we skip right past. He gave the place a name. He named the mountain for what happened there. God provides. And the text says, so it is said to this day. The land carried that name forward. The land remembered. And that is the answer to the question the title of my sermon asks, what does the land remember? The land remembers everything. It remembers the knife. It remembers the climb. And it can also remember the moment a hand was stopped. It can carry a name forward to this day because somebody let themselves be halted and to call a place holy. This land under us here in Toronto remembers what was taken. We have said so this morning. The question this day actually puts to you is narrower and harder. What will this land remember about us? What name will it carry forward from what we do here today? Will it remember a church that only ever knew the first "Here I am"? Or a people who, late and owing, finally learned the third one? Because that is what the rent is. It's a very small "Here I am" said in the third way. It's not like, "Here I am, I'll take it from here." God knows the church has said that far too often, and the wreckage of it is the reason why we stood in the garden this morning. It is, "Here I am, accountable. Here I am, and not in charge." The people who built the Pay the Rent movement understood the grammar of it. The nations whose land this is make the decisions. And the rest of us keep the books and pay what is owed. It is not charity. We don't get to feel generous about it. It's a debt, something already owed, on a mountain that was never ours. It just struck me funny, my metaphor about the mountain, when I'm from British Columbia and I feel like there's no mountains in Ontario. We sang this morning that we are all one people. And in the deepest sense, before God, that is true. But the envelope in your bulletin says something our hymn didn't, that we are not the same, that this relationship runs between distinct peoples, that one of them is owed and one of them owes. Both of these things are true at once, and a faithful church has to be able to hold both, the oneness and the difference, without collapsing one into the other. And here, friends, is the gospel hiding inside this old and terrible story. There was a ram. Abraham did not have to finish. You were allowed to take your hand off the knife. You are not asked to spend the rest of your life defending a comfort that costs other people everything. There is another way to be faithful. And it does not require one more burst of certainty. It requires the opposite. It requires the willingness to be stopped, to trust that there is provision on this mountain, that there is release. In a moment, we're going to take an offering, and it will go to the Native Men's Residence and the Native Women's Center, to people with addresses in this city, on this land. And then we are going to stand and sing that we are on holy ground, which is exactly what Abraham did. And we are going to name this place for what God does here. So let the land remember this about us, that on this day, a people put their hand down, that we said together, here we are, and we mean it the third way. It is a start, and it is owed. And the voice that stops us is also the voice that even now is saying, that's a beginning. Now keep